The song you are listening to is considered to be one of the first Chinese pop songs called Mao Mao, composed by Li Jinhui and sung by his daughter Li Minghui, considered the first pop star of China. Her shrill voice has been compared to the sound of a cat being strangled. The birth of Chinese pop music reflected an era of Chinese history where Shanghai was considered the Paris of the East. Shanghai has been a crucial trading port even during the dynastic times. During the Qing dynasty in 1684, the port accepted ocean-bound vessels, and Shanghai attained control over all customs in the Jiangsu province. Its location allowed it a strategic position for Western trade. During the First Opium War, the British held the port, announcing Shanghai to be a treaty port, opening the city to foreign involvement. Shanghai was soon carved up by concessions to British, French, and Americans, each intermixing their culture and society with the existing Shanghainese society. Western influence thrived, and Shanghai became an important industrial center and trading port that attracted not only foreign business people, 60,000 by the 1930s, but also Chinese migrants from other parts of the country. It is in this time period that Western jazz was introduced into the society. This era was called the Shanghai International Settlement. Now let's go back to what this has to do with the music at the time. The gramophone bolstered the growth of Chinese pop music simply because it made it more accessible. More choices in music was made available to the gramophone owner regardless of whether they lived in New York or Shanghai, allowing for exposure to other genres in foreign places. This reflected the sounds that existed during the time period. This early style would soon be replaced by more sophisticated performances from better trained singers. The songs of the period often used the ABA or ABCA form, which were new to Chinese and are still used by modern composers. The instrumentation is remarkably American jazz, while the singing styles differ in the sense that it is more pertaining to the original and traditional Chinese folk. The Western jazz influences were shaped predominantly by American jazz musician Buck Clayton, which reflects the foreign influence in musical culture. As mentioned before, foreigners thrived all throughout Shanghai during this time period. Around the start of the 20th century, a young Frenchman named Lambessat set up an outdoor stall on Tibet Road in Shanghai and began to play a gramophone record for Chinese passerby. Lambessat's career initially consisted of operating a peep show for Shanghai theatergoers. He'd purchased an imported gramophone from a foreign firm, Montrier and Company. His new money scheme was simple. When a sufficiently large crowd had gathered around the machine, he would ask each listener to pay 10 cents to hear a record called Laughing Foreigners. Anyone able to resist laughing along with the chuckles and guffaws coming from the gramophone would get their money back. Long story short, he made enough money to establish a record company of his own, the Pathé Orient. This record company would not only dominate the Chinese record industry, but also continue to extend throughout Southeast Asia. And they wouldn't be the only ones. Other companies, as the Victor Talking Machine Company, would also move into China in their search for new markets. The decadence and immense wealth of the music played all throughout Shanghai's bourgeois cinemas and cafes, its erotic sounds drifting onto the streets where the poor pulled carts of people to their destinations. In the 1940s, 时代曲, as this genre of music was referred to, reached its peak as famous jazz musicians from both the US and China played in its packed dance halls. A central figure in the creation of many of the songs related to this genre is Li Jinhui. Between 1927 and 1936, Li pioneered a new and hugely influential brand of sinified jazz music, recorded literally hundreds of modern songs for various companies. The era in which 时代曲 thrived was also an era where intellectuals wanted to break from traditional China and become a new, stronger nation. For example, the May 4th movement in Beijing 1919 was in response to the government's weak response to the Treaty of Versailles. In addition, the fact that China was ruled by warlords was problematic during the Sino-Japanese War from July 7, 1937 to September 2, 1945. There was no doubt that in the midst of all the spears of influence from foreign nations, the attack from the Japanese, that China was also hungry for a sound that roared and stood for everyone, just as the intellectuals reflected. Hu Xi, a Chinese philosopher, essayist, and diplomat, was rethinking Chinese literature. Liang Qichao was discussing the role of fiction in a society, and Zhao Zhuoren on what literature should be. Li Jinhui, through popularizing Mandarin through music, allowed for the vernacular language to thrive, which is essentially Mandarin Chinese, and it is a language that all can speak, and not limited to certain classes. His fame worked against him. Officials of the Kuomintang attempted to ban his music for his decadence and vulgarity. His yellow music simply made China look weak, and in the wake of the Japanese annexation of Manchuria in 1932, leftist critics labeled his music as a vulgar surrender to outside forces at the expense of the greatness in which China could be. In the wake of the communist victory of 1949, Li's reputation as a purveyor of yellow or pornographic music solidified into an article of socialist faith. He died in 1937, at the height of the Cultural Revolution, a victim of political persecution, even though he helped the roots of the very movement itself grow. Fun fact, he composed politically satirical lyrics based on local folk songs for the newspapers during the feuding warlords era, one of which so incensed a local warlord that Li was physically assaulted in retribution. This showed that he wasn't intentionally lewd in his music. The slow death of what was now labeled as yellow music came the rise of music from composers like Nier in the wake of the May 4th movement, an orchestration dedicated to harnessing music to the imperatives of nation building. Nier was just what China needed at the time. With the West attempting to reinforce spheres of influence, Japan attacking at the lines, and civil war in China, his songs mostly had themes of working-class life and struggles. Communism was attaining popularity over the Kuomintang as it spread, that they didn't help much during the rape of Nanking. And just as Li Jinhui's music was denounced for being indecent and unfitting, Nier's music had strength in timbre and more Chinese folk sounds in its influence. This reinforced the Chinese nationalistic attitudes at the time. Known as the people's musician, the defining strength as a sound is best represented through the March of Volunteers, or the present-day Chinese national anthem. After the 1949 Chinese Revolution, Mao Zedong proclaimed the establishment of the PRC. The music that was allowed to exist had to be pro-communist propaganda. All else was deemed either indecent, censored, or banned. For instance, the song Give Me a Kiss or 给我一个吻 came out in the 1950s and was banned when it first came out for its erotic lyrics. The singer, Zhang Lu, who was one of the most popular singers in Shanghai during the 1940s, fled to Hong Kong, as did all other singers that were popular for what is now denounced as yellow music. As westernized pop leisure music continued to thrive in Taiwan and Hong Kong, the songs that were popular in China or allowed were either the model operas or revolutionary songs. The Communist Revolution demanded changes in the arts, so we get the revision of a number of Beijing operas from Mao's wife, Jiang Qing, in the 1960s to match with the themes. Even March of the Volunteers was suspended in favor of The East is Red as the national anthem. The East is Red is very much reflective of what China was pushed to be at the time. The lyrics of the song were a tribute to Li Yaoyuan, a farmer from northern Shaanxi, and the melody was derived from a local folk song. In December 1978, after Deng Xiaoping came to power, an open-door policy was instituted that allowed cultural products from Hong Kong and Taiwan to enter China. Certain works of media were still discouraged. By the late 70s, Taiwanese artists have been smuggled into China, listened to in secrecy. Its appeals showed that the people of China desired something looser than the tightly dictated cultural production, defined taste, and restricted leisure by the communist government. Thus came a rise of Hong Kong Taiwan or Gangtai culture. Teresa Tang was one such artist, often listened to in secrecy, who is loved for the sweet coloratura novelty of her voice and the interpersonal connection in which her lyrics provided. Tang's songs were very popular, despite a ban on her songs by the Chinese government for being bourgeois. The ban was finally lifted in 1986. While propaganda music deals with larger issues as socialism and nationalism, Gong Tai song lyrics are well loved for their ability to hone in on incidents and feelings in which people can identify with. They are able to express individual feelings, yangqing. This shows that the people preferring individuality as opposed to collectivism was the previous emphasis. The reforms of the 1980s had led to a budding market economy, which benefited some people but hurt others, and the one-party political system also faced a challenge of legitimacy. Common grievances at the time included inflation, limited preparation of graduates for the new economy, and restrictions on political participation. This added fire to the population desire for a differing and more individually expressive art forms. Cui Jian's rock music rose at a time where all these emotions flourished. His song, 一无所有, Nothing to My Name, was the anthem of the Tiananmen Square protest of 1989. Known as the godfather of Chinese rock, he gained further notoriety for performing his political anthem, Piece of Red Cloth, with a red blindfold across his eyes in the early 1990s. His fanbase reflected that there were citizens who did not wholeheartedly align with the ideals of the Chinese Communist Party. However, in the 1990s, there came a rise in works pertaining to the party and state leaders, especially Mao Zedong. Referred to as the Mao craze, the Mao nostalgia shined through when disco renditions of old pro-communist music became hit bestsellers. For instance, in 1992, The Red Sun was a pop music album covering odes to Mao Zedong with a disco beat. The album was so successful that 4 more volumes were issued. Additionally, in the 90s, many cantopop singers from Hong Kong, such as the 4 Heavenly Kings, Aaron Kwok, Leon Lai, Andy Lau, and Jackie Chung, also began to dominate. The pop industry, however, was a lot bigger in Hong Kong and Taiwan than it was in the mainland.